Welcome to Automotive Alchemy, a podcast that dwells in the cavernous depths of data, unearthing precious gems of wisdom to illuminate your path to digital marketing success. As alchemists, we understand that each nugget of information is a vital ingredient in our elixir of knowledge. So ready yourselves as we embark on an enlightening journey through the arcane world of data-driven automotive marketing.
Welcome back to Automotive Alchemy. Today, absolutely special. I want to say special guest, but he's part of the Dealer Alchemist crew, Jeff Clark. Welcome to Automotive Alchemy.
Sean, thank you very much.
I'm excited about this. So for the audience, whether you're listening, watching, or both, you probably have seen Jeff Clark all over the automotive industry because he's an absolute pioneer. And, I'll maybe let you if you want to do a little bit of bragging, but I like to typically keep this brief. And I would just tell the audience, if you're not familiar with what Jeff has done in the industry from website platforms like dealer.com and DealerOn, and then, of course, multiple other businesses that he has built up and sold, he's literally a veteran, but somebody who has moved mountains in the industry with a lot of different companies and just literally stacked up tons of success. And now he's the president and partner at Dealer Alchemist, and these guys are absolutely everywhere in the industry. Today, we're going to talk about one of the things that they specialize in, and I'm really excited to kind of walk you through this episode with Jeff on OTT. So, Jeff, I think we open this can by helping especially the dealer audience, or maybe those that are just not as familiar.
Sure.
Let's just start with, what is OTT? We have so many acronyms in every industry, but the car business is full of them. What's OTT? Is it the same as CTV? Let's just start with the basics. Help us understand, what is it?
Great opening question. And you're right, this industry is full of acronyms. Kind of like the military. We just shorten everything up and throw in acronyms everywhere. So
Yeah.
OTT really stands for over the top, and it defines multiple touch points. So your iPhone, your smartphone device, your tablet, all of those devices fall under the OTT category. While we reference it as OTT, we're really talking about CTV, right? CTV being connected television. So, let's fast forward a little bit and talk about what the industry loves to refer to as cord cutters. And I know in my household, we cut the cord some time ago. And for the audience that doesn't know what a cord cutter is, those are folks that have moved away from traditional cable. Growing up as kids, when we got cable TV, that was the coolest because we got MTV and we got HBO and we got Cinemax. And, we'll tell this story on another time about watching Cinemax after 1 o'clock in the morning.
I'm a red-blooded, dude, so I get it. Yep.
But CTV is really where people get the bulk of their entertainment. You see it on airplanes, you see it in airports, you see it in the mall. People are watching or binge watching their favorite shows. But the preferred place to do that's in the comfort of your own home, watching your 45, 50, 60, 80-inch television. And that's really where the bulk of the impactful media comes from today, as it would relate to what is oftentimes referred to as OTT.
Yeah, and OTT's really become very important in the digital landscape. 10 years we weren't talking about it at all. 5 years ago we started to talk about it. Why do you think it's become so important today, especially for car dealers?
That's a wonderful question. Sean, there's been a monumental shift. I mean, yes, we're in 2024. While COVID seems like it was just yesterday, it also seems like it was far away. And leading into COVID, that 2018, 2019, while cord cutters were still around and streaming services were gaining momentum, most car dealers were still using traditional media advertising. They were working with their agencies, and they were going to the major three networks during either morning or prime drive time in the evening, and they were putting a large amount of their budget into those buckets, if you will. What happened is as COVID hit, obviously a huge slamming on the brakes of the supply chain.
Yeah.
If you were a dealer and you had cars that you couldn't give away, now you were not only selling them, but you were selling them for thousands of dollars of profit above and beyond what you would normally hope to sell that vehicle for. So I think dealers got comfortable in saying, well, listen, if I've got 50 people lined up to buy 2 cars, why am I spending money in advertising? Can't knock anyone for that, right? You have to ask, what am I doing with my money, and should I save it for a rainy day? What has since happened is inventory levels have come back up. Dealers are seeing higher inventory levels than they've seen in the last several years. Yet they haven't gone back and taken that budget that they had pulled away from traditional advertising and reallocated that. And what I mean when I say reallocation is, you know, at a certain point, when you take enough money out of the market, you start to feel it in your sales. And because really in the last, since 2010, 2012, what you're really seeing, and if you think about it, even though again it seems like yesterday, that was in some cases 12 to 14 years ago. 60% of that audience has now cut the cord and is now doing strictly streaming, just because the cost had become so outrageous.
Mm.
And some of the audience might say, well, the purpose of streaming is that, there's no ad supported content. Actually, most people that have cut the cord are opting for ad supported content because it's free. So, now you have the chance or opportunity as a dealer principal or a decision maker inside of a dealership to say, hey, how do I intelligently reinvest my money back into the market? And in no way is this a statement against traditional. Traditional has a tremendous amount of value. You just need to be intelligent in that allocation. So what's really happened with COVID, with the shift, dealers were, let's be honest, they were getting fat and happy. And now that we've
Mm-hmm.
got to go back to selling, you're going back to the well, trying to do the same thing over and over again. We'll oftentimes joke that's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and hoping for different results.
Yeah.
So OTT CTV is one of the greatest, most untapped areas of opportunity that a retail car dealer could utilize today.
Yeah, all of it's fascinating to me. I'm very well aware of it, and when people started to talk about it, a few years back now, I was naive, not willfully ignorant, but certainly not one of my areas of expertise. And as the years have rolled on, a lot of the things that you're even talking about now, they feel even personalized because you're living through the evolution of something that's an expansion within this digital sector. And I'm glad to hear you to say as well that there's a place for traditional as well. I mean, knowing your ICP, or there's another marketing jargon, knowing your ideal customer profile is really important to know where
Sure.
OTT fits and CTV fits. So one of the things I wanted to ask is, especially because I know there will be people that consume this information that are also just like, hey, share with me some of the basics of how OTT platforms are being utilized right now within the automotive industry, and really maybe not just too high up in the sky at 30,000 feet, but really with dealers, how they are beginning to utilize them.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I'll hopefully dissect it in a way that isn't too high level, but also doesn't get us down into the weeds. So there are a number of marketplaces, right? Just they're infinite. There are more people out there selling, OTT spot spaces, placements than you've got stocks listed on the stock exchange. It's almost infinite, right? So what has happened, at least at this stage, because while a decade plus of OTT CTV being available, and when I say OTT and CTV, I'm also referencing streaming audio. I'm also referencing um, direct display. So when you're like gas station TV, if you go to the gas station and go to fill your gas pump and you're getting subjected to an ad, now oftentimes it's a hot dog and a bag of chips and a soda for $2.49. Come into your local Sunoco or 7-Eleven or Quick Trip or whatever your gas station of preference or point is.
Yeah.
What it's doing is it's capturing people in those micro moments. Remember, Google used to talk about micro moments all the time.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
getting those little snippets of time to get your brand at an optimal time where you've got someone's captive attention. Unless you live in the state of New Jersey, and I don't know if there's any other states out there, you're out there pumping your own gas. So they've got you for anywhere from 5 minutes to as much as 10 or 15 minutes, depending on what you're driving.
Yeah.
And they've got your captive attention. So you're talking about placing media at an optimal time. Now, the key to placing that media is knowing whether or not the consumer's in market or not. And that's one of the beautiful things that OTT and CTV can actually do. It can identify an in-market consumer. So one of the biggest things that I'll share, and if people take nothing else away from this than this, you really want to start with an attribution first framework. We do it in pay-per-click, we do it in social, we do it in so many different parts of digital advertising. But the industry has failed to really do it with OTT and CTV. It's sort of the Wild West.
Hmm.
Believe it or not, the biggest purveyors of that content are actually the cable companies. They're your Spectrum reaches, they're your Comcast, they're your, again, the list goes on. And none of those companies' names mentions anything about the quality of their product or otherwise. Just simply saying that the ISPs and the DSPs are out there and they've got a ton of content and they know consumer behavior. They know when they're watching television. They know what they're watching. They know if you're connected to other devices while you're watching your favorite shows. That content is it's available, right? It's available for retail car dealers to say, I want to get my message, but I want to get my message as a Toyota dealer to every consumer in my market that either owns a Toyota or is interested in owning a Toyota or previously has maybe owned a Toyota. And I'm talking for fixed and variable, both.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just a variable play and this isn't just a fixed play. This is getting a directed message. You and I have known each other long enough that we go back to the day of the good old fashioned pop-up coupon. You go to a website, it jumps up, it sees you, everyone gets $500. Well, when everyone gets something, it's not really special.
Mm.
But when an ad can be directed to a consumer based on their intent, and it happens all the time. I mean, right here on my desk is my smartphone, right? My iPhone never leaves my side. You ever notice that you say something sometimes, even though you haven't done a search, and miraculously you start seeing that very content the next time you log on?
Yeah, it's
The
crazy.
same exact opportunity exists and has existed with CTV and OTT for quite some period of time.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And again, as I listen and understand conceptually, I also love the fact please feel free to jump in on this, but our industry has 3 different tiers, and at tier 1 there's always a tremendous amount of spending that happens for people that are consuming media through their televisions, which at tier 1 is great. But OTT, CTV, whichever is the appropriate acronym for what I'm about to say, seems like a brilliant place for the local version of the brand. You've referenced Toyota a couple of times. Anyone that knows me knows I've been a Tundra guy specifically for, I don't know, I'm on my second Tundra, and the first one I nearly drove the wheels off of. I like trucks, period, but I've loved being a Tundra owner. And so when Toyota stuff comes up, it typically gets my attention. But
Sure.
Very specifically, I'm sitting here watching a Texas Rangers game, and I get a specific actual dealership in my market area to cut through. That seems like almost like a no-brainer of why would you not be wanting to cut through to people at that level when they may already have the softening of the ground, maybe is at tier 1, maybe even the region, tier 2 is doing some stuff. And
Sure.
then you, the dealer, get to come through at tier 3 and say, I'm the closest thing to you, or I'm within 25 miles, give us a shot. Is that one of the best ways that dealers should be thinking about, or at least one of the more significant ways to utilize OTT?
It is hands down the most cost-effective and affordable way to reach an in-market or interested consumer. We've talked over the years, we refer to them as hand raisers, right? I
Mm,
might be interested in your product. I attended your session. Please tell me more.
yeah.
This is just perfect for a tier 3. I mean, think about it. Let's start at the back of the house and let's work forward. Imagine giving your service department, your service writers, your service manager the ability to go back to that declined service consumer and say to them, Mr. Rains, we know that you care about your Toyota Tundra. Most recently, when you were in for your oil change and tire rotation, you opted not to select our 30,000 mile service, right? And most of those services are preventative. They're not necessarily correcting anything, but
Yeah.
as you know, if you change an oil in a Toyota, put gas in it, and do the basic maintenance,
Yeah.
the chances are the chassis is going to wear out, or you're going to wear out before the truck wears out.
Yes.
So being able to reach those consumers, and whether it's a declined service, whether it's a service defector, whether it is just someone that didn't have the time that day, right? What if you
Yeah.
could send them a targeted message to that household? I don't have to tell the neighbor to the right or to the left that, hey, with this QR code or with this ad or with this, special code, you can get 10% or 15% off of a service. Or when you come in for this service, reference this ad and we'll do this additionally. Now move to the front side of the house and think about new and used car inventory, right? Last time I checked, most dealers, that's hard cash tied up on the ground for anything they have used in CPO. So those are vehicles that I want to be moving like now, today. As
Yeah.
those things are being bought at the auction, I want to be marketing those. So the wonderful thing about CTV as it relates to OTT is that we can get an ad specific to that vehicle or specific to that dealership to those households in the market that have raised their hand but are no longer connected to traditional television and are no longer connected to listening to standard radio. Every one of my vehicles has a satellite radio service in it. Yet the only place I drive these days is to the airport and to my son's baseball game.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not in a car like someone that would be commuting X amount of time. So now what you have is you have me as a captive listener. Well, a lot of these streaming services, you can opt for ad driven content, or you can opt to pay in some cases, $30 a month to not get any ads. But how are you going to reach those consumers? Again, and now fast forward to sitting down in the evening and wanting to catch up on Yellowstone or wanting to catch up on one of your other Breaking Bad or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
We as advertisers know that Sean Rains is a Toyota owner, buyer, lover. We also know that he buys a car every X number of months or years. Targeting that information and getting Sean engaged is the best way for that dealer to get their message directed to the market. I'm all about reach and frequency, and I hear people throw those terms around quite frequently. If you're in a smaller market, trust me when I tell you the consumers in that market know that you're one of 2 Toyota dealers within 50 miles. But come to a
Mm-hmm.
major metropolitan market like Washington, D.C., where I live, you've got to have 30 Toyota dealers within a 45-minute drive of one another. So that's
Mm-hmm.
really where you need to be able to stand out and connect with those households. But
Yeah.
it's taking that consumer data and being able to attribute, like one of my favorite statements. You ready? Fraud does not convert.
Mm.
And you might think,
I
fraud?
like that.
What do you mean fraud? Guys, this is a $25 billion industry. The streaming industry. It's $25 billion.
Wow.
Do you think there's maybe hints of fraud when you start talking about that kind of money? There absolutely is. And
Sure.
if you do research, if you go out there, for instance, app spoofing is a real and serious thing. So I'll throw you a curveball. We're both baseball lovers. Take a guess
Yep.
at one of the most spoofed apps that exists today.
Whew.
And there's tons of apps, but what do you think the top one, maybe two, even three most spoofed apps are out there?
Gosh, I don't know. Maybe like an ESPN or maybe a CNN or a Fox News or something like that.
Close. What if I told you the MLB Network app is one of the most spoofed apps out there,
Mm.
or the Weather Channel?
So I know you're about to share with us on that. So app spoofing. Tell us about that. So you're talking App Store, right? For those of us, I'll just pretend like the audience is with me saying, okay, we're thinking right, Jeff, right? You're saying apps like we went to the Apple App Store or the Google Android App Store and we want to download apps for our phones. You're talking about spoofing apps like that. Yes?
Correct. And what's
Okay.
happened is, I mean, look, go back how many times in the last X number of years have you had internet security training from your employer that said, if you see an email and it seems suspicious, right? It's the same concept. It's someone taking and representing themselves as if though they have available media. And who wouldn't want to advertise on the MLB network? Who wouldn't want to advertise on the Weather Channel? So
Yeah.
many people, and I get this question often. One of my dealers, as a matter of fact, God love him, right? He's got his dealerships are in a, let's call it, more remote southern area. And he specifically wanted to only be on Fox News Network. He didn't want to be on any other networks. He just,
Because they're probably most popular in his area
they
and
were
like that.
absolutely most popular in his area. And I could
Yeah.
feel his passion. I could feel that's my consumer, that's my audience. I know my people. I've been here all my life.
Yeah.
I don't disagree. But the thing you don't want to do, whether it's World Cup, World Series, Super Bowl, Final Four, you don't want to go out and tell your partners where to go buy media.
Mm.
That's like telling your doctor how to operate on you.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. You want to
Yeah.
go where the consumers are, and you want to be able to consume and buy the highest converting media. And when I go back and I talk about fraud doesn't convert, what I'm saying is fraud exists everywhere,
Mm. Oh yeah.
right? Clickbait,
Yeah.
pay-per-click fraud, you name it, it goes on and on and on. And this isn't exclusive to the automotive industry.
Oh
My
no.
point
Yeah.
is really good advertisers are going to be able to detect the fraud. Why? Because it's not converting.
Yeah.
And it's simple enough to pull the plug on that advertiser. I can tell you, we've got more people that we won't buy media from than people
Mm.
that we will buy media from. So what
Yeah.
that should say to everyone listening is have you just checked the box?
Mm.
Me as a dealer, have I just checked the box? I ask people sometimes, do you do chat? Yep. How's it work for you? I have no idea. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting response. I love the fact that they're honest. Do you have OTT or CTV? Yep. How's it working? I don't know. That should be a little alarming that you're spending
Hmm.
money on something and you don't know if it's converting. And again, that's where OTT and CTV from certain suppliers can get confusing because they're not showing you attribution. They can't account for a lift in sales. They
Mm.
can't show that Jeff Clark or Sean Rains, because of this wonderful little device, stepped foot onto your lot to look at a vehicle. And that's really where finding the right partners is key and critical for your dealers, because your dealers need to first start with the why. Why am I doing this? What do I hope to
Mm.
get out of it? Well, of course, I want to sell more cars. Fantastic. What is it doing for you? That's normally where the brakes get pumped.
Yeah, you just unpacked a few things that I think are they're great. That I just want to reiterate, so the audience um, is really picking up on this. One, I love the fact that you addressed that. There's in all forms of marketing, there's fraud. It's been there in paid search. I mean, the amount of bot traffic, even with organic, has always been an issue. People discovering that in their analytics. And that's a real issue, and it always will be an issue. I mean, the social media platforms. I mean, the people that that are, I think, suspicious that 50% of Twitter is fake. We know that there are tons of content farms everywhere, so there's always people that kind of want to game a system, but it doesn't mean. And so I love the phrase that fraud doesn't convert, because it's true. All that stuff, whether it's found here within OTT or paid search or bot traffic, the fraudulent stuff doesn't convert. But knowing that is a factor that is really, really, actually, it seems to be important to know, because it doesn't mean that the entire medium isn't valuable. In fact, it's what you're saying is it's extremely valuable, but you also got to know a couple of things so that you're not just checking a box.
Absolutely.
And dealers have historically, and this is me being, and you and I both, we have known each other a long time, always been kind of sympathetic to the fact that dealers are constantly dealing with layers and layers and layers of more new stuff, technical new stuff. And they're just sitting here in a lot of cases saying, how do you expect us to keep up with all this stuff? So I like the breaking down of there's always some things to be aware of. Some of that can be fraud, some of the challenges of putting all these things together. And I think that's an important thing for dealers that might be thinking. You actually answered a question that was going to be my next one to you, which is kind of facing some of the challenge of integrating this into their marketing mix. And I think one of those you mentioned, just don't let it just be a box that you check. You're going to need to know enough about it so that you're making smart decisions, because the ability to cut through with your brand and those specific messages, again, what you were just sharing made me immediately think of the dealership where I go, the Toyota dealership where I go for service. They have been relentlessly pounding me for weeks through text messages and phone calls, through snail mail, which I just literally, my wife put on my desk the other day, because they don't understand, like you, I don't drive as much as I used to. So hitting my intervals for oil changes, 30,000, 60,000, all that stuff is way off from what their tools say. But oh my goodness, they probably would have gotten my attention even more so, because baseball season's back, and since how we've talked about baseball a little bit, if all of a sudden I got a more specialized message about service from their store while I'm sitting here watching a Texas Rangers game, that might be the medium that finally gets me to actually tell them, hey, by the way, I will be in when it's time, but you're about 10,000 miles off.
Right.
That's pretty huge. So there are some things that dealers have to think about, like that could be the challenges, but they seem to be easily overcome, to make sure that it becomes something that, again, they're not checking the box, but you're fully integrating it in as a part of your overall strategy. The touch points through TV are just huge not to be involved in it.
They're enormous, and let's address another issue. Most dealers, at least the ones that I've dealt with in my 26 years career, want to just stick their toes in the water to see if it works. That's not a concept you want to try with this particular medium. And here's why. I'm not a very good poker player. And I know that. So, by the way, please, any of your listeners out there want to invite me to a poker game, know that I'll show up and just throw my money on the table and just get it over with quick.
Yeah, it. Pour me a bourbon and take my money.
Exactly. Because you know if I'm going to come get you. And you also know that I'm just completely full of it and I'm not holding anything. The wonderful thing about the game of poker is you better have enough money if you're going to sit down at the table, right? And the mistake, and I use poker as an analogy because so many dealers will sit down, and for instance, we worked with a partner the other day. Their Kia store had an addressable market, optimal market within 17 miles of the dealership of more than $50,000 in addressable spend. One of their other stores had an addressable market of more than $30,000. That's $80,000. Now, some of your listeners might be going, oh my God, I'm never going to do that. Well, of course you would. If you can prove that you're selling enough cars, you'd write that check all day long.
Yeah.
Of course you would. But what's the thing that we've been trained to do? Let's try it. Let's see if it works. And if it works, I'll spend more money. What most dealers are doing today is they're spending $5,000 or $4,000 or maybe $8,000. If you're, and again, think small, medium, large, right? You want just enough to show a presence in the market. But if you're spending 8 and barrier of entry is at 30, there's a major disconnect there.
Yeah.
Do yourself a favor. Get out of it. Go put your $8,000 somewhere else. I mean that. I personally don't want to lose any client, nor do I want anyone who is a competitive to go lose a client. But you really have to ask yourself the question, if for me to have a presence or for me to dominate a market, I should be spending X or Y, and you're spending down here. You don't have enough money working media spend to actually make an impact. You're not going to reach those households. It's unfair to you as the dealer. It's even more unfair to the advertiser supporting you because you're expecting them to work miracles with your $8,000. Here's a news flash for you. Go spend your $8,000 somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because you're wasting your money. I'd rather you take and save that money for an entire year and then come see me for 90 days and let me show you what a real lift can do when you put the right working media together. But again, it's got to be an attribution first model. You have to demand and expect. Today with CTV and OTT, you can actually do sales matchbacks. You can tell that consumer actually was in the dealership and bought a car or showed up at the dealership. So there's just so many different ways that you can better attribute your ad dollars. But again, it all starts with why am I doing this? Am I just checking the box? And more importantly, am I spending enough money? Now, that's always a loaded question to go back to an advertiser with, right?
Yeah.
Sean, I'm a dealer. Am I spending enough money with you? Well, of course you're not. You need to spend more. But you need to look at the market. You need to look at the addressable households. You need to look at the market that you're going after. And you need to better ask, am I seeing the results? Because at the end of the day, the wonderful thing of it is we want to see people walking into the showroom, right? My retail experience taught me that I want my phone ringing or people walking through the door. If I've got to email you back or get on the phone to call you, my chances of engaging you are significantly less. And that's really where OTT and CTV come into play.
Yeah, so we're kind of we've crawled our way into a little bit of things that kind of feel like implementation. And I love, this is just you, this is kind of who you are, but just real talk. Like, if $8,000 isn't even like, come on, that's like, that doesn't even buy your prom dress. So you're not even getting to the dance. You're just going to tell somebody. Maybe they may not like it, but I've been saying this lately. Like, listen, if the truth hurts, it's not my fault. So,
one of my favorite statements is my data trumps your feelings, right? I'm never, you know me well enough and you've known me long enough. I'm going to shoot you straight. I'm going to tell you if what you're doing makes sense. Now, we can debate strategy, and I think debate is healthy, right?
Yeah.
I really do. It welcomes my viewpoint of it. I'm sitting behind a desk running an ad tech company, right? And a very successful one at that. You're grinding out every day in the retail world, trying to get every up, fight for every vehicle, get the right allocations, do all the right. I mean, God bless people on the retail front lines, right? Especially in major markets. It's just a tremendous amount of work, but it's knowing who you are. It's knowing, is this the right vehicle for me today to get to the next destination point in growing my business? It doesn't do me any good to go out and buy a car I can barely afford, get financed, and 6 months later, the repo man's getting it, right?
Yeah.
If you can't afford that car, step it down a little bit. but maybe that's a category or classification of vehicle that you shouldn't be in to begin with until your situation changes. And where I think dealers, again, they need to go back and they really need to think about, what was I spending pre-COVID? How much of that was going to traditional? Because again, there's a lot of value in traditional if done correctly.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you remember back when you and I were coming up through the ranks in the digital world? And one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of sales guys would make when going into talking to dealers is immediately attacking them spending money on traditional. You can't track it. You can't prove it. You can't do this. And I
Yeah.
would always tell my salespeople, please don't do that. You're insulting someone who has grown a very successful business by doing the things that they're doing. Challenge them to reallocate some of that budget to see if they can get a better measurement and a better result. And that's
Yeah.
all we're doing here today. We're asking you, Mr. and Mrs. Dealer, please think about the hard fought ad dollars that you fight to put together to grow your business. And what is it doing for you? Are
Yeah.
you checking the box? And if you're not, and if you're asking a lot of the right questions, because I have dealers, I'm on the phone with them and they'll ask me, hey, Jeff, what about fraud? How do you deal with it? Man, I got a laundry list for you. I'll tell you what we do. I'll tell you how we do it. I'll tell you why we do it. And I'll also tell you, you know what? We ourselves sometimes are victims of fraud. And we do this for a living. But when we find it, we set it aside and we move on.
Yeah.
Anytime there's enough dollars at play, whether it's in Bitcoin, buying media, anything else, someone's going to figure out a way to spoof it and to create fraud. It's unfortunately it's society and we can't change that. But what we
Yeah.
can change is the demand and the expectation. And the other thing that I'll share with you, because this is another one of those key takeaways. I had a professor in college that used to smack the podium every time something was going to be on the midterm. Well, I'm smacking my desk here. CPM doesn't matter. Cost per thousand does not matter. It is a vanity metric and it is complete and utter noise. Jeff, why do you say that? I'll tell you why. Because you're forcibly making your advertiser buy inexpensive traffic to show you that you can get a cheaper cost per thousand. I don't care what it costs me per thousand, as long as I'm selling cars and I'm getting the results. So if you're being approached and if you're being sold to, it doesn't mean that the people selling it to you are bad intention, because that's how they've been taught to sell it to you.
Yeah.
So stop focusing on, well, I've got a $40 CPM and that's wonderful. Who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
You're stepping over dollars to pick up dimes because you're proud of the fact. I mean, back in the day, how many times do we remember time on site was a major metric? Today, all the data shows us the less time you're on your site, the better design site you have. Now, if there are repeat visitors that have come back time and time again and are spending a little bit more time each time, that's just showing the path that they're going down towards the sale.
Yeah.
So I know I throw a lot at you, but clearly I get passionate about this subject because I want people to understand that there's a huge value to doing CTV properly.
Yeah. I pick up on a couple things. Is it safe for me to assume that part of your the dialogue that you have with dealers when they're even just considering it, even if they haven't signed a deal and you guys are implementing, but one of the things that you guys do with them is to help them understand if they actually have a budget that would pay off for them, using kind of that $8,000 versus you kind of need to be at 20 or 30 to even be in, your market dictates this. Is it safe for me to assume that that's part of what you guys go through with a dealer of like, hey, if you want to get in the game, here's the places, and probably you could give them a good, better, best. But if they're like, yeah, we were wondering what we could do for $600 in OTT, you guys would be like, yeah, nothing. But in a way that's consultative, that helps them understand that if you want to get into the game, this is kind of how you guys assess that. It's safe to assume that you guys kind of walk dealers through that.
Absolutely. And, here's an interesting statistic. This came from a very notable source. Dealers are capturing less than 5% of the addressable market in the OTT CTV arena. Less than 5% of the addressable market. 95% of dealers out there aren't. And again, just because you're doing some OTT does not mean that you're truly in the game. because you just don't have the budget to sit down and play in the market. And again, you've got all kinds of other expenses. You've got your website, you've got your, your BDC, you've got your pay-per-click, your display, your retargeting, your remarketing, your SEO. I mean, the budgets have swollen to just epic levels. I remember as you and I had built a company together, looking and watching how those budgets had shifted over time. The
Mm,
same growth that you've seen over the last probably 15 years with paid search is the exact same growth that you will start to see with OTT and CTV, because
mm.
people will begin to appreciate the value and what it actually provides them in terms of an ROI. And that's when you're going to really start to see the light bulb go off for some folks, because again, we can actually prove it to you. Now, does it take us 60 days to be able to get all the metrics back and sit down and show you the lift you've had? Absolutely it does. It doesn't happen instantaneously. And in the automotive world, we want everything to happen today. So you got to be a little patient for that data to be gathered and to be adjusted and explained. But the wonderful thing about it is it's all attributed, every last piece of it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to ask you is like how do the dealerships measure OTT for success or just kind of what's happening there? I'm not as familiar with that in terms of the measurement of this type of advertising.
It's being able to tie that consumer at that household to entering into the physical dealership. So we all know this wonderful device, right? And I go back to this because this is something that people spend hours every day with their head buried into. It's the very
Mhm,
first thing you pick up when you wake up in the morning, other than a cup of coffee, right? It's the very last thing that you look at before you go to sleep at night,
mhm.
unequivocally, right? And with that, you have this wonderful thing called location services, right? This phone literally gives off what's known as a gray pulse. So when you pick up your phone, I literally just yesterday got back from New York. And when you're in New York, what's one of the things that you really want to do? You want to have some New York style pizza, right? So when I plug in pizza, it was giving me pizza from Manhattan. I didn't get a chance to have pizza in Manhattan. It wasn't until I got back to Long Island. But sure enough, when I plugged in just the simple word pizza, I started getting Long Island based pizza shops.
Hmm.
That very technology, as simplistic as it is, tells everything about you. Your phone knows your political beliefs. It knows the apps that you're running, if they're open. Almost everyone has Waze. Almost everyone has, whether it's Facebook or Snapchat, all these different apps are gathering data on you.
Yeah.
You agree to it when you sign up for the app under the wonderful thing called a EULA license, a user licensing agreement that gives those advertisers permission to track your whereabouts. So it is so simplistic that the fact that we can see when you've engaged, we know if a phone call has come from that household where we've targeted. And hey, I'm Jeff calling Sean at the dealership. Hey, I'm looking for a forerunner for my son. I saw your ad. Is this vehicle still in stock? And of course, what am I going to do? I'm going to want to come down to the dealership after I've done some research and maybe test drive the vehicle, talk with my wife about it to see if it's the right purchase for our son. And just it kind of goes on and on and on. So,
Yeah.
gone are the days of spray and pray. You can genuinely track a consumer all the way through to the point of visit and purchase through CTV if done correctly.
Hmm. Now, are there specific like OTT platforms or maybe they're called services that you believe are maybe more beneficial or ideal for car dealers?
There's some wonderful companies in the market today. I would encourage every dealer out there to talk to their ad agency. You're welcome to reach out to Dealer Alchemist directly, um, even ask for me directly, and I'm happy to have those discussions. The problem with OTT today is it truly is the Wild West. I could go out tomorrow and set up an OTT business with no, you know, formal background other than my years of experience of running companies in the automotive space. And I can go to the exchange and I can buy media and I can sell it to a dealer. And as long as I've got capital to do the float or the right billing processes for my consumer, and now I'm off selling media, right?
Mm.
So I would dig in a little bit deeper and find out what is your experience in OTT? Where do you buy your media from? So I had shared with you earlier today before we got on the call a chart that shows market share by major players, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that when this is released to the public and you take a look at it, some of the biggest names in all of streaming only have about that much of the market share, right? Because there's so many players, whether it's
Hmm.
Peacock, whether it's Hulu, whether it's Netflix. I mean, you would think some of these names would have, this much market share. Well,
Yeah.
remember, it's a $25 billion addressable market. So their percentage calculates to a lot of dollars, but how do you get the right mix? What's the right mix for your brand, your market? Toyota dealership in Texas is different than one in Florida, it's different than one in New York, and it's different than one in California. Your buyers are different, their buying habits are different. You can't just say, "Hey, I've got a dealer here and they do this and why can't you do that?" Well, because it's two different markets. And you'll find that when it comes to buying media, we have a very strict rule here. If it doesn't convert, you're gone. Period. End of story. We'll look at it, we'll try to analyze the data, but we're looking for activity, right? We want to see the ground shake. We want to see movement. Now, as you, the dealer, it's entirely up to you to put that consumer into a car. That's not my job. My
Hmm.
job is to bring you an interested consumer and deliver them to you in a cost-effective manner where it's good for you and it's good for me. And it's been a pleasurable experience for the consumer. And when you can target them and speak to them directly, look, nothing drives me more crazy than snail mail. I still to this day get pieces of mail on a Lexus LS that I owned 10 years ago, 9 years ago, right? Nine
Hmm.
years, I'm getting media. Someone wasted a stamp and killed a tree to send me something on a car that I haven't had in 9 years, which
Yeah.
tells me they've got bad data. Their advertising partners aren't flushing out the lists. And
Yeah.
we're so rushed, we're so hurried to do the same thing time and time and time again, man. Check the box, check the box. Did I do this? Did my ads get out? Did I do that? Boom, 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 boom. And you're always chasing that next number.
Yeah, that it's interesting you mentioned that around data. I can only imagine. Feel free to share your thoughts, but that analytics and audience data play actually a really significant role in OTT in terms of optimizing. But without having a lot of personal experience myself of kind of looking, especially on the analytics side, but um, I would guess that would also then become a really a significant thing to be kind of tracking uh, in the analytics world, because you would be learning things that you would then pour back into optimizing the campaign for even better and better, like continually improved performance.
Absolutely. So our philosophy is it's a continual process improvement. We're constantly looking at the traffic that's being driven and is activity being taken? Because again, we can see, and I don't want this to spook people, but we can see inside the household. We know when a consumer has seen an ad. We know when the ad was delivered. We
Mm-hmm.
know the activity that's taking place. We know when someone has gone to the website. You know, something that's interesting. Some advertisers will talk about your ad was delivered at this time. By the way, one of the things we don't do is we don't run ads overnight, right? During the late night hours into the early morning, we're not spending a dealer's money, because one of two things is happening if someone's up that late at night, right? Neither of which are probably good. And you don't need to be spending your ad dollars to do those things. And there are advertisers out there that will show our ads ran on this network and you got this much of a completion time. So I share this story because this comes from a friend of mine. You familiar with something called dog TV?
No.
Okay.
Dog TV,
Dog
like
TV,
my dog,
like
woof
your
woof,
dog, your
my
dog.
dog Maisie.
I didn't know what dog TV was until I heard this story. So I went and looked it up, and dog TV was designed and built for diehard pet lovers. So when you leave to go to work, you don't want your dog being lonely while you're gone. So they turn on dog TV.
Okay.
True story.
I believe it. I didn't know that existed, but
I,
when we're going to be
I'm,
gone for a
I'm
while, we
telling
turn
you,
on a game and leave it on for the dog.
look, I would rather you leave the Rangers game on for the dog.
We do.
Nonetheless, and what we had found through our partners was there was all this consumption. There was all this consumption going on, yet we weren't seeing a single clickable action coming out of any of it. Well,
Because it's
come to find
dog.
out, the consumer in the household was interested in the car, but they weren't seeing the ad because the dog was the one watching TV. Like
Wow.
you can't make these things up. And
Yeah.
that's when I go back to, I don't believe for a moment the advertisers ever felt like that was fraudulent.
Yeah.
Some young media buyer sat there and said, I've got to fulfill this media order. I need to place this much media with this much activity at this cost per 1,000 impression.
Yeah.
And as such, I've hit my golden, hey, here's my CPM number, and I got you this much activity.
Yeah.
Well, as an educated dealer, I'm going to go back and say, well, what channels were you showing my media on?
Mm-hmm.
And a really good advertiser will tell you the date, the time, and the place that media was shown. They can do that. Now, I love dogs. I'm a huge dog lover. I think dogs are wonderful. Matter of fact, I like dogs better than I do people, truth be told.
Too.
But the interesting thing of it is, and again, this isn't to poke fun at anyone. This is a chance to make light of what is a real situation that sometimes our dealers find themselves in. And look, I feel you when you say, how are they supposed to stay on top of all this stuff?
Yeah.
I'm old enough, as are you, to remember when websites first started hitting dealerships. And I remember dealerships, I don't need a website. No one will ever buy a car online. I remember when eBay hit.
Yeah.
Who's ever going to buy a car sight unseen? Well, guess what? I got a news flash for you. 3 million cars later, right? What do people do? So I think as retailers, we make the mistake of thinking, well, we would never do that. So why would anyone else do that?
Yeah.
And that's where the shift, the paradigm shift, the opening your mind to what consumers can do will help you better understand or appreciate what can be done if you open your mind to saying, okay, I'm spending, and again, this is no attack on direct mail, right? But I recently met a dealer that was shifting a massive amount of his budget to direct mail. Massive. I mean, I'm talking tens and tens and tens of thousands of dollars. I was interested. So I asked, who's your direct mail company? What do you feel that they do? We kind of went through the whole discussion. And what it all boiled down to was nothing else was working for him. He had had success in direct mail previously. I assume with the same partner, don't know, didn't ask, right? So now he was going to go back to what once worked for him, which is direct mail.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty risky play, sitting from my side of the desk, to put that much of your budget or your total addressable budget into direct mail, when I know for me personally, every single one of those things goes directly in the trash. I don't even look at them. Right?
Me too. Mm-hmm.
Now, again, not knocking a direct mail company and not knocking a dealer on a decision. What's the traditional 1% to 2%? If the math pencils, great. But having something where that the market continues to do this, with consumers cutting the cord and more people on streaming services and less people tied to a cable box.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to put your message there, or at least gamble a little bit and take part of that money and put it in direct mail because you're passionate about it? It's work for you. Why change it?
Yeah.
But take another part of it and shift it over here and sit still for 90 days.
Yeah.
So, the quick takeaway is, don't tell your media company how to spend your money in OTT and what channels to spend it on. Just don't. It's a
Yeah.
really bad idea.
Those are really, really great points. And, I, as a B2B marketing guy now, but my foundation being in B2C, it applies to both business to consumer and business to business. When you're talking about marketing, you need to always tell people that most of marketing is experimentation. And if you've done something once and it paid dividends, or like you said, the math pencils, great. But if it stopped doing that, therefore you stopped investing in it, it may not be the best thing to go back around to something that you already exhausted, versus remembering that most of marketing is experimental, where when you begin something, and I try to tell, and I not just dealers but businesses, just like Dealer Alchemist, there's always a segment of your marketing budget that you should have in its infancy stage or phase one, where your expectations of what's going to happen with it are nothing. Like, don't expect anything. Expect that you always have to be curious about the places where it seems like, there's something to this, and the audience is great, and where are all the fish? Like, where are you going to start fishing? OTT seems like a no-brainer, and it seems like a place that's rapidly evolving, has been since it kind of hit the marketplace, but with so much more upside that it seems like a smart place to be doing that. So I would tell dealers, just to kind of piggyback on what you're sharing, Jeff.
So I
I would
love
just
your
tell dealers,
analogy on
yeah,
the fish thing. And I shared this with a dealer the other day and it seemed to work. So I think I'm going to kind of keep with it.
yeah,
And I had no idea what his response would be. And I said to him, I said, "Sir, are you a fisherman?" And man, he lit up like that smile couldn't have been any bigger. He
yeah,
goes, "I am. Do you fish?" I said, "Sometimes. I'm not very good and I have zero patience." But I said, every time we go to our lake house, my son enjoys fishing. So trying to be a good dad, I'm going to go down there, even though I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm going to fish. And he goes, "Well, then, that's good. That's great." So, we talked kids and grandkids and fishing and shared a couple of fish stories. I said, "So if you're a fisherman, you have a boat?" He goes, "Oh, yeah." I said, "You have a fishing boat?" He goes, "Oh, yeah." Told me all about the boat and the size and the engines. And okay, great. I said, "Do you have a fish finder on your boat?" He goes, "I do." I said, "Isn't that thing great? It shows you like where all the fish are and how deep they are." I said, "That is OTT. That is CTV.
mm,
CTV and OTT are the fish finder for consumers in your market." Now, your consumers aren't fish, obviously, but you want to
yeah,
hook them like fish and you drag them in
yeah,
like fish and you want
yeah,
to get a
yeah,
big haul.
yeah,
That is the most realistic kind of measurement. So for anyone listening, whether you're a fisherman or not, if you know what a fish finder is, that's
mm-hmm,
ideally what OTT and CTV can do for a dealership if done properly, because you can
yeah,
literally find that consumer, whether, or that fish, whether they're in a cove or in the deeper part of the lake or early morning or later in the day.
mm-hmm,
Again, the wonderful thing about technology is it tells all. And if you're just smart enough to listen to technology and embrace it, and I love your analogy about set aside part of your budget to try things with zero expectations.
mm-hmm,
And you can hope and see what it does, because too oftentimes the automotive industry is reactive instead of proactive. And
mm-hmm,
that's one of the things that I would encourage, start being more proactive, start challenging what your market looks like. And if you're in a market where you've got advertisers that just own the airways, that's fine. You can compete with those bigger guys by going down the CTV route and spend a fraction of the money and still reach a pretty significant amount of the addressable market.
absolutely. You put that stuff in phase one, and if it passes phase one, then you move it on. But that no expectation phase, that's where you always learn the new stuff. And a lot of people, dealers and companies that are selling services to dealers, they get a little bit apprehensive, or some very apprehensive, about that phase one of, but zero expectation. We don't know if it's going to work. But every single thing you've ever done with marketing at one point in time was at phase one, and it passed your sniff test. So you moved it to phase two because it was worth it, or you threw it out. And so I love the fishing metaphor is fantastic. It's really great. Believe it or not, we've we've been burning miles on this road so quickly that we're at my last question, at least for this episode, and that is just future. Do you see kind of where's this especially for our industry, where's it going in the next couple of years? Do you have any insight on that?
I don't have a crystal ball, but what I can tell you is I've been closely monitoring the OTT CTV landscape for the last 6 years. That really came about more through just education and sitting at conferences and working with people and talking, with some of the thought leaders about what's that next greatest thing. Just the last 6 years alone, you can see almost hockey stick growth for OTT. Again, even though 3 to 5% of dealers are doing it, there's another portion that are just, again, kind of sticking their toes in the water a little bit to see, what is possible. I believe what's going to happen is you're going to get even more increased clarity into the ad dollars and into the networks. I do believe that there are a number of companies out there um, that are going to address the fraud issues because it has become a real concern in some places. There are 2 or 3 companies doing amazing jobs being able to catch that fraud. And again, people given the chance to act poorly, some people are going to act poorly, period. But it's having advertisers around you that can catch it, correct it, and make sure at the end of the day that they're placing your dollars in the right place. And I think the ease of things is going to be better. One of the struggles with CTV and the OTT platform was just the creative piece. One of the hurdles to it is that, to put an ad out there, so oftentimes the dealer needed to go create essentially a commercial, right? Today there are automation tools that can do that without creative and production costs. Now, I don't think much beats a really high quality production piece that, markets and stands out with your dealership, but sometimes using automation to create an ad for Tundras, if you're heavy on them, or Tacomas. And I give a lot of love to Toyota because Toyota as a brand is very creative. They're
Mhm.
very forward thinking. I've had the pleasure of working with Toyota as a brand for well over 20 years. And I can tell you, there are some other really great brands out there that put a lot of effort and time, but both you and I know from our time together, Toyota was always the ones making the major investments and making sure that their dealers, had all the best assets and the best guidance. And
Yeah.
so I give a lot of love to that brand because they're always such a pleasure to work with and for. Um,
Hmm.
I think you're going to see, attribution become the core, similar to what you saw. And I love George Nemi, by the way, and all that he's done to work on GA4 and the transparency, because that was a big deal too. Moving from analytics as we knew it before to GA4, you're going to
Yeah.
see that same migration take place within the OTT CTV realm. It's not there. It won't be there for a while. That is something that's going to take time. But as more advertisers come to market and as dealers demand more transparency, you're going to see that take place. And I think, frankly, you're going to find that a lot of the DSPs and ISPs are going to do a better job of making sure that the traffic that goes out there and the data that goes out there is of high quality. So just, again, I encourage people, if you don't know, ask. And if you're doing something to just go through the motions, that's okay. At least you tried. You can't ever be mad at yourself for trying, but try to educate yourself, try to learn, try to find someone who knows better. So you can really kind of go through the progressive steps to say, am I getting just a YouTube pre-roll product? Am I buying just from Amazon because they're Amazon? And by the way, I love Amazon. The Amazon driver knows my wife, my kids, and what we eat pretty much every night of the week. Because at some point I come home and there's a package outside. Yes, a
Yeah.
lot of these companies know a lot of things about you, but no one company, not Netflix, not Amazon, not Hulu, not Fubu, none of them know everything about your buying habits. And that's where having a data partner who can find the right mechanisms, find the right media for you, and then address it to your market and address your message to the consumer, only then will the industry really start to hit stride. We're still a little ways away, but I'm really encouraged by the growth and very much encouraged by some of the players in the market bringing innovation to the forefront of what is really the new media for car dealers.
Fantastic. What a great episode. I'm already thinking of things that I want to ask you on the next episode where we talk about OTT and CTV, because I feel like we scratched the surface, but there's so much more depth that we can explore. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Clark, president and partner at dealer Alchemist, has been our guest today. Thanks for joining us for another episode of Automotive Alchemy. Like this, subscribe. If you're on the YouTube and you're consuming this through YouTube, subscribe so you'll know every time we drop a new episode. We also put a lot of small short form content from these episodes all over, but we certainly do that in LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. Follow us. Of course, the LinkedIn page is a great place to follow and get more information. If you want to go deeper, to take advantage even of a complimentary digital marketing audit, go to dealeralchemist.com and get in touch. And of course, don't miss us. We'll have another episode before you know it, where we'll continue to turn automotive challenges into gold. Till next time.